All right. Hey, everybody. It's a great afternoon for community things. We are up here. We're about to talk about intersectional communities and things. I'm Shana. I am the Principal Marketing Manager of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Community Programming at HubSpot. Please try and say that 5 times fast. Today, we're going to be talking about creating intersectional, inclusive, and intentional communities. This is going to be very fun, very interactive. So please ask all of the questions throughout. There will be time at the end because I have this timed to a very specific time. And so I want to be sure that all of this is engaging and all of that, and that we just have a ball. Let's do some things. Let's talk about leveling up our community stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you, and I'm going to switch over so that I can see the chat. Hey, everybody. Hey, Christina. Hey, Kat. Ready to go. So we are going to go live and talk here and move in here, all the screens. So as mentioned, I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. And I want to let all of you know that you've made it. We've made it to the point where we need to level up how we do community building. I don't want you to fear if you're just getting into community building, or if you've been in this space for a long time or are a thought leader in the space, which you have heard plenty of over the last couple of days. And I hope you've enjoyed who you've heard already. If you haven't given them any love, I hope that they're here, and you should drop it in the chat so that they can come back to it. But I can tell you one thing, we all need this conversation. Right now, I'm going to be that friend that kind of gives you some brutal honesty around the fact that we aren't doing that great when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives in our communities. And so you may be feeling a little guilty during this conversation. That might happen. That might be a feeling that comes up, or you might feel a little bit uncomfortable. And if it is, honestly, good, because I'm not here for your comfort. I'm here to help you take action to quickly address your community's needs around intersectionality, inclusivity, and making sure each of these are intentional and not performative. Before we get started into the creation of these intentional spaces, we have to understand the basic foundation of belonging, because really, after diversity and inclusion comes belonging. If you haven't read Charles Vogel's book, The Art of Community, he lays out 7 principles for belonging. And these include boundaries, initiation, rituals, temple, stories, symbols, and the inner rings. To get the full details and definitions of each, I super suggest that you order the book, and then order Carrie Melissa Jones's book that amplifies these principles as well and gives actionable steps around it. It's called The Art of Community, Art of Belonging, one of the two. But order it. It's on Amazon. And each of these principles set the foundation for making a community that is intersectional, inclusive, and intentional. Now, we are going to deep dive into how we can create full belonging within our community. We're going to do this by breaking down each of these actions that we want to have ingrained in our communities. Now, I want to make it clear that what I'm presenting to you is no longer a nice to have or an afterthought, or we will get there when we have the resources to staff it. Communities are on the rise, and we need to be a proactive leading force in intersectionality, inclusivity, and intentional communities. This equation shows that intersectionality should be visible and encouraged throughout your community and organizations. Inclusion should live in the DNA of your community and company, and that putting these together will show the value and impact your community can have. Currently at HubSpot, I am in the process of creating a subgroup within the community that drives diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. My first initiative is creating a group for Black business professionals to drive networking, mentorship, and tools and resources that are written for us, by us. We already have an overall HubSpot community space built out. There are community managers that are running it. They have their own goals and objectives. Where I come in is implementing a new section to that and breaking a lot of things in the process. And if our director is listening to this, I hope that they think it's in a good way. I promise that it is. It's all for the greater good. And while building this subgroup, there are things that I have to think about. One, how will this subgroup not be isolated in this community? I don't want to create a silo where diverse groups continue to be othered. This subgroup needs to be as much of a priority as the other groups within the community. I want to also remind you that you may not want to implement it in the way that I'm doing it. I'm creating a whole subgroup within the community because our community members asked for it. This is just what I am doing, and it may not be something that you're doing. You could implement it in different ways throughout your space, through your initiatives, through your programming, through your guidelines. There are multiple ways. This is just the example of how I'm doing it. Secondly, what part of the community culture do we need to improve for the community as a whole to feel safe, have their values aligned, and that members will be seen and understood? 3, how do we drive impact for potential members? Then carry that within the bigger space. I don't want people to show up and feel that this entire community is not for them and that they only fit into this one group. And how do we represent diverse backgrounds throughout the community? How do we provide them with opportunities for leadership, rewards, and support? So let's have a quick kiki to make sure that you are keeping up with each of these phrases that I have repeated multiple times already. To break it down, intersectional communities means that we are recognizing certain individuals face multiple and intersecting forms of structural discrimination. Inclusive communities show that people who are engaging in the space will be valued for their uniqueness and abilities with opportunities and access to resources. And intentional communities, all of our communities need to be intentional around how it functions, how we interact, how we highlight issues, and more. So let's start with deep diving into intersectionality. The definition of intersectionality comes from Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. As community leaders, we have to implement intersectionality within our communities. Successful communities aim to offer growth, knowledge, shared values, and support. Again, that is just the framework. To make things easy, mainly for myself, honestly, using the HubSpot community and how I'm thinking about Black business professionals who will engage here, I already know that this experience is different for Black professionals as compared to their cisgender white male counterparts. Between the racial wealth gap, lower approval rates, and even the amount of jobs lost during the pandemic, I know that this group is going to need different resources, and I need to be ready to provide them. Here are action steps that you will need to take to bring intersectionality to the forefront. First, you need to do some research. Listed here is the research that I did to present to our executive leadership. I found data for different backgrounds of people that will be engaging in our community space. And this slide shows at the top the deep dive that I did on social media, within groups, the conversations that I had with my own personal network, as well as suggestions from the network that I spoke with through HubSpot. And the bottom half shows percentages of the impact that we're trying to make within the space. These are actual percentages that represent what it's like to be a Black business professional and how the odds are kind of stacked against us. You also need to talk to a diverse group of people. If you are doing customer research and the people that you are talking to either look the same, come from similar backgrounds, or are in the same part of the world, then you just need to go ahead and start over. How are you going to speak to multiple experiences or drive values and knowledge growth if it's coming from all the same voices? When members join, they need to see themselves in the community through representation and clear visibility of your values and mission. When having these conversations, here are a few questions that you can ask to learn about your member experiences. What are their challenges? Where do they go to find answers? What would they find valuable? What would get them to spend time in your community as compared to other communities? What does their day-to-day look like? The day-to-day look like is my favorite question to ask because each of them are going to be going through different experiences. And we also need to find a reason for why they would take their busy day-to-days and spend time in our community. After asking these questions, you will then want to brainstorm around how you can solve the pain points and needs for your community members based on your responses. Also, be sure to put yourself into multiple spaces where community members would find resources. This can include hashtags, groups, Clubhouse or Twitter spaces, Reddit, newsletters, YouTube, Discord. Be sure to be an active lurker. And if you don't belong to that community, then you need to do this double time because you need to be aware of the space that you take up. There are plenty of ways to do research. You don't need to take up space in areas that are for a specific background. Use your network, read, and read again, watch videos, talk to friends, leverage their network. If you have the means to reach out to those leaders or members to see if they will do a one-on-one call, please be sure that when you're using their time, that there is some sort of in-kind trade or that you are able to pay them. I know that's probably laughable for some of our community budgets, but if it's possible, make sure that it is worthy of their time. Or do as HubSpot did and hire someone who can. You need to have an above average understanding of your members' personal journey so they can be successful in your community. People's backgrounds, gender identity, race, ethnicity, social class, sexual orientation, ability, religion, all need to be at the forefront of planning for your community. You need to recognize that these are a part of people, and that if it crosses in ways that can negatively impact them in society. What is your community going to do to support this instead of adding to the already bleak narrative? Inclusion in the community means that the people who are engaging in the space will be valued for their uniqueness and abilities with opportunities and access resources. The look and feel of your community, while important, can be implemented in multiple ways. So here's some more questions that you can think about when designing. What does your language look like? Who are your top leaders or contributors? Who is writing your blogs? What does your gamification look like? Who stars in your videos? Who is a featured community member and how do you go about picking them? Are there photos of people in your community? Who's in those photos? Do an audit of your community and have a diverse group of community members give you specific feedback around their experience. This can come in the form of surveys, calls. Some of us are able to go out and be in public again. You can randomly show people the community while you're out and see what some of their initial thoughts are. Because if you go look at your community now and see a carbon copy of the same person, then changes need to be made. This is where you need to actively invite people to be a part of your strategy, your content planning, your design, engagement, events, all of it. Collaboration and feedback will be your best friends in this area. You'll also see that this is a time where communities cannot be silent around the hot mess that the world is. And we have to be confident and consistent in speaking up around these issues. Many of you probably know me from my work at HER, and I was actively leading our community when George Floyd was murdered. It was no surprise that we spoke up and spoke up fairly quickly. Our content didn't really change because we were already doing the work, and we had extremely low backlash from our community because we were so transparent about what our mission and values were. Just think if all communities did the same thing. There would be way more trust in businesses and way more feelings of belonging within our communities. Ways that you can help to do this are by bringing in multiple voices and perspectives. They will show you the discussions that are being had, hopefully be very transparent about their feelings and what they really want from a company and their community. Then put those faces at the forefront of your discussions, not in a way that tokenizes them, but in a way that amplifies them, supports them, and then is followed by action. This is no longer a time where we can be stagnant or reactive. We have to be proactive. And at the end of the day, communities are made on purpose. We are purposeful in how we bring people together. Now we need to be intentional about how the community functions, interacts, highlights issues, and more. For people to thrive, they need to feel as if they are a part of your organization. Clearly lay out your community intentions so there is never a question that your community members won't be supported. Put your mission, values, and initiatives at the forefront of the community and tie it into the goals with the company. If they don't have any, then this is a great opportunity for you to make them. Make sure your guidelines support your mission and values. Take swift action whenever that is broken so that your members have trust in you. You have to be consistent and quick about taking action in your community when someone breaks community guidelines. Make sure your values are identified and implemented with any programming, content, event planning. Anything that's being implemented in the community needs to tie back to your values. Values both for your business and for your community members will help everyone stay aligned and intentional. Figure out your community's why. Share it across your team so that they never question the value that the community is providing. So let's talk about accountability. We need to hold companies accountable at all times, and you are going to be the driver of doing that within your community space. So to do this, you need to create actionable steps that other departments or leadership are held accountable for to make sure that these values are instilled within the company. Putting them to task will have them remember what you're doing and make sure that these values are woven into your company's DNA. Train your team around community identities and values. This is also the opportunity to make sure that your team is aligned on a global level and that they understand different cultures and backgrounds. Language here is key. Lastly, have key stakeholders around the company collaborate with you on community efforts. Getting them involved in the community space will continue to show value for your business, but also get more of the company invested in the community. And for exclusivity, sometimes you need to have specific events for specific people. Just make sure there is a specific purpose for them and the goal is clear. Don't just throw it out there randomly, especially if this is not something that you've had a history of doing. For example, I will have events that are exclusive to Black businesses, but I will also make sure that they are aware of all the other events and that those events have diverse panels, discussions, and topics. Don't silo off all of your events. There are ways to cross over and ways to collaborate. You need to build those opportunities for collaboration. Put everybody in the room. Make sure they all have a seat at the table. The reflection of the community is real, and if the community is healthy, the company is healthy, which means if we can host these exclusive events or opportunities and there's little backlash or questioning or any issue, then your community understands the importance of this programming for your varying community members and that the values are intact. Because I teach better by showing, here's what I'm doing to prepare for my community launch. So as I mentioned before, I did a bunch of background research. You saw my list of percentages around Black-owned businesses. That was imperative because it gave me a North Star for why I was creating the space. I identified where we are trying to make impact, what the bigger numbers were, how does that support our why, and then I identified a few facts and hypotheses. Went and joined multiple groups, put myself in those spaces, read a ton, and proved them all to be valuable to my overall community strategy. I identified my community's why through our customer testimonials. I think I spoke to so many customers, but there was a core group of about 12 people that gave me great feedback and very pointed, actionable steps. And so I leaned into those and made the mission and value clear and listed them out so that we could always refer to them for reference. I created a list of values, 4 to be exact. These values support your intention for the community and emphasize the value add for the community personas that were created. We have, a clear mission and make sure that you don't get started unless you have this. I tied our mission at HubSpot with the Black Businesses group to our Inbound group. Inbound is a large conference that HubSpot hosts every year, and we have our most popular meetup, Black and Inbound, wanted to partner with HubSpot. Otherwise, I would have generally left it alone. But they wanted to partner with HubSpot and create a space that would last year round. We pulled that in and drove our mission around what they were working on too, and that's how we're creating this space. Obviously, you're going to create measurable KPIs. I broke it down between the community KPIs that I plan to impact and then had community-specific metrics. I provided a list of stakeholders and responsibilities for leadership and created my list of tactics for what success would look like for each different persona. Now, I have a few things left to do on my list. I want to update community guidelines, creating avenues for diverse group of contributors to create content in the community. I'm creating identity badges rather than just task badges and creating more spaces and opportunities at our annual conference. And finally, going to build out a mentorship program, just a casual everyday for a community launch list. Now, everything I've listed is on top of our current tactics for building out your community strategy. These tips here will help take you to the next level, asking these questions and taking action at the beginning, rather than stating that you'll come back to it. Let's be honest, us as community managers already have a ton on our plate and very little resources. Take the time to invest in diversity, especially intersectionality, inclusivity, and being intentional as you launch or grow your community. For established communities, it's never too late to go back and get to work. This way, when you look back on your community members, you are seeing the wonderfully rainbow-filled world we live in and not just a majority group. This will keep people of all backgrounds feeling safe and confident in that this space includes them too. And for yourself, be sure to ask these things consistently and every time you plan to do any sort of programming. How are we making diversity and inclusion and belonging a priority? How are we amplifying diverse community members? And how are we putting our words into actions? This needs to be constantly reviewed at every step that you're creating your community space, and know that you will be constantly asking these questions because the work is never complete. And if at any point you or your boss states that you'll never be able to find those voices, or it shouldn't be a priority, or anything that challenges DEI initiatives in general, just remind them that Beyonce had a record-breaking performance at Coachella in which she spent months on the music alone before bringing in dancers, and she was able to find 24 Black trombone players to do it, which is just very specific, but she did that. So your job is to be the homecoming for your community. And that's the end of our slides. We have a few minutes left if anyone wants to drop any questions in the chat. How do you effectively shut down the BS diversity of thought argument? That is an amazing question. The BS of diversity of thought reminds, one, that probably comes from a white guy named Chad. I'm sorry if there's anybody in here named Chad, but probably comes from that. And I shut it down to say that, one, you have people in your community, and if these people are utilizing your community space, then you have the right to represent for them. And sometimes you have to be okay with allowing people to show their ugly colors and then be like, great, this community is no longer for you. And if you're consistent with your voice around, again, the value and the mission, I will always tie it into that. We had people who came onto Her when I worked there and think that, oh, well, I'm a lesbian, but I don't support this trans identified person in our community space. And we're like, great, well, then this space is not for you. We have to be able to have different stories. We're not siloed into one space. And if this group is going to be about multiple voices, we're going to highlight and showcase them. And if you put action into that thought, then you're going to be good to go. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I missed a bunch of these chats. I had it in a different tab, but I'm excited to answer everybody else's questions. Next question says, can you say more about gamification as it relates to inclusion? Yes. One, you have to find the priority of like the actions that you want the community to take and how that will work in terms of building the value that your community wants. So we can do the basic gamification of like, oh yeah, you liked a bunch of these things. Great, we're gonna give you an award. Great, you made your first couple of posts. Awesome, you're gonna get another reward. For my community space, we are leaning on networking, mentorship, tools and resources. And so I'm gonna drive my gamification around those behaviors and try and amplify those things because that is what my community members find value in. And I want to also, in the near future, we're going to hopefully get in a bunch of like training and things that are going to lean on that space. So with our DIMB initiatives in the community, I want to give awards for people who complete some anti-racism training. I want to give community members training badges. Wow, words are hard. Create badges to implement these new initiatives in their company or to become a HubSpot approved DIMB type space. We want all of those things to be implemented in there. So I'm thinking about the values that are going into it and then the end goal of like, what do these initiatives actually drive and then create gamification around it. Okay, I have 2 more minutes. Can we talk mistakes and failure? Communities are people run and bound to make mistakes. How do you deal with failure? Do you differentiate your response between small errors and big ones? I'm going to answer the last question first. Yes, absolutely differentiate your response between small errors and big ones. When I did an initiative a few years ago, it blew up in my face. I thought I was doing everything right, but the way that I communicated it to the community did not go well. They thought it was a completely different movement. And so I had to go back and like actually make a statement, own what we did, but then we did a bunch of actionable things after that to make sure that it never happened again. And some of that included like as big of things as doing a whole redesign of our brand and smaller actions around how we communicated what we were doing, changing up our content, using our voice, actually admitting that like we aren't perfect, but here are the action steps that we're doing. So If you've come to a talk that I've done before, make sure that you have receipts of everything that you're doing and how you're going to implement it. Okay, I'm going to try and get these last couple. We have a minute. Corporatization during events like Pride can read disingenuous, girl. Yes. I hope those are your pronouns, by the way. But I mean that in the most like non-binary way, I promise. You mentioned you would have left Black gay men alone. Have they not asked? What would you have done instead? How do you maintain authenticity? Yeah, so one, I have a whole talk about the fact of corporate use of Pride and how they just like change their Pride, their logo to pride flags and what they're doing there. And it's very obnoxious. I can send you a video of that later. And honestly, for groups that are already established, unless they do really ask for it, you kind of just like let them grow and then figure out ways to support them. So I probably would have come in a different way. If they wanted to kind of just be their own individual group, I would have figured out different ways to amplify them and say, this is what we're going to be sure to do. We're going to make sure that you have the tools and resources to do each of these things rather than creating this whole group and then worked in another way. I still go and get responses from our community to say, what would you have wanted to do? I could have just switched and done a whole event focus. I could have switched and done a whole content focus. I could have switched and focused solely on making our community more accessible for people with different levels of disabilities. There are multiple things, and all of those things I listed, I'm probably still going to do anyway, but different areas that you can go into. Slides, sure. I'm happy sharing them. Why not? I'm going to do last question. How is tech core industry able to measure accountability in building diverse and inclusive hires? Oh my gosh, Camille, I can't answer that in 2 seconds, but I will message you and we'll talk about it. But this chat looks hilarious. I'm going to go back and look at it because clearly I missed all of it, but I appreciate all of you for tuning in, and please stay and listen for Travis's talk. You're all amazing. Talk to you soon. Bye.